Welcome to the Best of MBS podcast, a collection of the best interviews hosted by Michael Bungay Stanier, best-selling author of The Coaching Habit and How to Begin. Today's interview is from the We Will Get Through This podcast. Here's your host, MBS.
So last year I had the delight and honor to be named on the shortlist for the Thinkers 50 Award for their coaching award, first coaching award being awarded. And I looked around the shortlist and I went, well, I'm in trouble here. I mean, I was lucky to get on the shortlist. There's no way I'm going to win a prize because the caliber of other people who were on that shortlist was really noticeable. I mean, it was a really high quality group of people. One of those people was Tom Kolditz. And when I introduce him to you, you'll understand exactly why you're thinking to yourself, yeah, Michael, I don't know why you made that shortlist. So Tom Kolditz is the founding director of the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University, which has been named top university program by the Association of Leadership Educators. In 2017, he received the Warren Bennis Award for Excellence in Leadership and is ranked among the top 25 global coaches for the last 3 years. The Doerr Institute is his fifth successful leader development startup, and his book, In Extremis Leadership, Leading as if your life depended upon it, has become, predictably enough perhaps, the go-to text in leading in the COVID-19 crisis. And before all of this, Tom was a Brigadier General in the U.S. military. So, Tom, it's really nice to talk to you again.
Michael, always a pleasure to be with you.
When you look at the book In Extremis Leadership, part of what's at the heart of it is understanding risk and managing risk. And I'm curious, when you think of both your military leadership and training and your business leadership and training, how do you go about evaluating risk?
Yeah, so it's really pretty straightforward. And there are two aspects of risk or two probabilities you have to look at. One is the most likely outcome, what's most likely to happen. And then second, what's the most dangerous outcome?
Right.
So there could be a whole array of possibilities, but if you can focus on the most likely outcome and take care of that, and then account for the most dangerous outcome and do a pretty good job of controlling that, well, then you're right where you need to be, because you'll never be able to predict all of the possible outcomes. Those are the two that you have to start with.
That's really interesting. Now, I know that when I'm in tough situations, my ability to actually judge outcomes, what the most likely is, what the most dangerous is, it actually isn't that great, because whatever biases I have kind of come to the fore, I'm often, I think there's a Bob Dylan song called Blood in My Eyes. And I'm like, I've got the kind of fear and anger and sadness. I've got these emotions coursing through me, and I'm actually not making great decisions around how to read a situation. Are there ways you would direct us around how do we get beyond our physical failings that stop us being as smart as we think we are?
Well, sure. I mean, the first and most obvious way is to get other people involved. And there is a terrific little process called a premortem, where you bring people together, anywhere from 6 to 50 people if you want. You give them a blank sheet of paper and you tell them, give me the most dangerous outcome. Tell me what is the most dangerous probability occurrence for us in our current circumstance. And have them give that to you anonymously, gather it all up, and then read them. And right. You'll find there's probably some consensus around that. The other thing that's really good about the premortems is they're very good if there is an off chance, oddball occurrence that, a few people see coming, but you don't as the leader, because it's so odd or so off track,
right,
or what you're usually looking at. And there are other good processes for logically deriving what the problems in an organization might be, but sometimes the worst problems are pretty irrational. And that's where this premortem comes in and does such a great job. It eliminates the possibility of, after the crisis, somebody standing off to the side going, well, hell, I knew that was going to happen.
Right.
I saw that coming a mile away. You have to find that person ahead of time.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, you're tapping into a couple of things. There's the wisdom of crowds, and you're going, what's the consensus amongst an interesting, select, curated crowd, and that tells you something. And then the oddball events, they're not exactly black swan events, because black swan events are really unimaginable, but they're kind of like rare white swans. If that's not maybe it's a duck. Anyway, it's not the obvious, but it's like out there on the outlier. But if more than one person's seeing it, maybe there's something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've done this process with groups, and I've found people who have committed crimes. I've found people who, unbeknownst to me, had addictions that were getting in the way of their work.
Right.
A lot of these things, once you see them, they make a lot of sense to you. But unless someone else can point them out, you'll never find them yourself.
Tom, I'm curious. I know one of the suggestions around the premortem was to have people put forward their input anonymously. One of the challenges that you've got, as you rose through the ranks to become a brigadier general, is you have the influence of leadership and the gravitas of leadership, and how easy it is if you're the leader to kind of suck the oxygen out of the room, suck the opinions out of the room, because it's like, the hippo effect, the highest, one of the most important person's opinion thing. How do you invite participation? How do you invite shared responsibility when you're a leader and just positionally there's something that discourages that?
Yeah, so I always try to start with the most junior, most vulnerable person in the room, and I'll reach out to them and I'll just cold call them. What do you think? And
Right.
usually they're so, they're so far from the top that they have this honesty about them. They're not high enough to be political yet.
I love that. That's
One of
kind
the
of
ways that I
naivety that gives them an honesty to him.
Yeah, and they'll tell you the truth, and then others will follow suit. But if you start with like your deputy or some other person of stature, you don't get it. When I was in the military, I used to ask my driver all the time. He was like a 19-year-old Hispanic kid from Odessa, Texas, and we'd be in a meeting, and I'd just turn to him and I'd say, Corporal Fritz, what do you think?
Right.
And he would tell me, and he was not stupid. I mean, he would generally have things pretty well dialed in. So I start with the youngest person, the least experienced person in the room, and build on that.
Now, for people who haven't met you, then people may have a kind of a reaction to go, look, how did somebody who is a brigadier general suddenly become a champion for coaching? Isn't there an inherent contradiction between a military hierarchy and a military way of working and this idea of what coaching brings, which feels like the opposite of a direct command? How do you square that particular circle, Tom?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of misconceptions about the military, and that's particularly true in a global context because, one army can be vastly different from another army. In the U.S. Army, there are two things that dominate the way that we interact with people. And the first is that there is nothing held in higher regard than leadership. It's considered to be the holy grail of military interaction. But the other thing that's key about the U.S. military is very egalitarian, very much a meritocracy.
Right.
And so people are expected to never lean on their rank. The rank gives them a certain set of responsibilities, but it doesn't give them any advantage in the framework that we operate in our military. So a general is supposed to take the same physical fitness test as a private.
Right.
And one of the things about being in combat, and our military has unfortunately been in combat for 15 years.
Yes.
The value of rank in combat, in situations where people are really afraid, goes down dramatically. People really don't care what your rank is.
Right.
If you're giving them bad advice, they're going to walk away from you. And likewise, someone who they do trust, regardless of rank, is who they're going to follow.
Uh-huh.
So perhaps on a parade field, leaders can be dictators and martinets and order people around. But in dangerous places, it just doesn't work that way because the threat is much higher than any sort of, you know, rank imbued authority. And so you really have to earn it in those situations.
And in fact, one of the things that you talk about in the book is that one of the ways to lead is to create a sense of shared risk. And I thought that was very interesting because so often if you're a leader, and this is not in the military, this is just throughout organizational life, quite often I see people when they, particularly newer leaders, they're like, I need to be responsible for everybody and everything, and it's all on my shoulders. That's what the job means. But you're actually encouraging something different. And I'm curious to know how you cultivate the responsibility and accountability that leads to a sense of shared risk.
Sure. Well, we found that concept to be predominant in Iraq. And really what we mean by that is this. Usually the lower level people in the organization are going to have inherently more risk.
Right.
And consequently, when a leader can reach down and demonstrate that they are sharing that risk, that leader has their own skin in the game, that they're not using their position to protect themselves when they're not doing that for the people who work with them. That's shared risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so if, we see this in corporate circumstances sometimes when leaders take a lot of their pay, a lot of their remuneration in company stock.
Right.
Because that means that, if the company goes down, it's not just the lower level employees who are going to be furloughed or fired, and that's the end of it. The leader has a lot to lose. And that's a great position from which to develop trust because people understand you're in it with them and they respect that and admire that.
Tom, the other thing that I've found impressive about you is the transition from being a senior leader in the military to being a successful and senior leader across different institutions outside the military life. And here's my hypothesis, that you must be good at unlearning. I mean, not just learning, the importance of learning is there, but there's something about the power of unlearning as well. And I'm wondering, and I don't know this to be, I might be just making this up, but I'm curious to know how you hold learning about what you take on and also what you put away.
I try to make sure that my focus is not on, my own style or my own preferences in how I lead and manage people. I focus almost entirely on what do the people around me need.
Mm.
And if you do that, if you focus on the people that you're leading and you don't focus on yourself, then your style or your way of engaging them will change just chameleon-like.
Right.
And, I was at West Point for 12 years, commanding an academic department that had 57 professors, and some of them were military and some of them were civilian professional academics. And
right.
And some of our military were young people who were fresh from combat, and others were, permanent military professors. And I had to engage with all of those constituencies in different ways. They all pretty much had different expectations.
Right.
And so I really think our best leaders are actually very good at adapting to these differing kinds of circumstances because it's not a personal consistency or style that moves us. It's what do these people in front of me need right now?
Right.
Are they fourth graders who want me to teach them about how a parachute works? Or are they senators who are visiting our department? Or something in between? And so if you make it about the people and not about yourself, it's really easy to adapt across all these kinds of circumstances.
I love that. And, it reminds me of the Daniel Goleman article back in, I think, 2000 in the HBR called Leadership That Gets Results. And he actually says, look, there are 6 different leadership styles. And great leaders know how to use the right one at the right time. And typical leaders use maybe 2, maybe 3 of those different leadership styles. But part of what you're saying, Tom, is that you read your audience, you read the context of that audience, you then get clear on the leadership style that you bring to that interaction.
Yes, exactly. When we did the research for the book you described, In Extremis Leadership, we did 175 interviews in Iraq, and we did not talk to a single leader. We were talking to soldiers who were being led by other people. And so we were essentially asking them, how did your leader behave that allowed you to follow them? And, how did your leader behave in ways that caused you to trust them? And questions like that. But it was all about the followers. We weren't interested in what the leaders thought.
One of the things that you talk about in that same book is managing emotion. And, it's interesting just reflecting back on your previous comment around the ability to go, is this a group of fourth graders, a group of senators, is it a young academic, is it an old academic? And part of the ability to be there and understand that need is an ability to get out of your own way. And one of the things that, for me anyway, and I think for others as well, that stops you getting out of your own way is being knocked off balance by however it is that you're feeling. And I'm curious to know your perspective on how you manage and handle emotions, because of course the military cliche is suppress them at all costs. Like, we don't want emotions here. We want hardcore, rational, just go for it. Don't let the feelings get in the way. But I suspect you got a different perspective on it.
Well, I think that I would say I manage my emotions very differently in a routine situation versus an intense situation like a crisis.
Right.
So in routine circumstances, it's kind of important that people see that you have honest and translatable emotions, that you can show sadness and you can show a little bit of concern and you can demonstrate empathy through the expression of your emotions.
Right.
When all of a sudden you're in a crisis and emotions can be contagious, my own emotions get a lot more flat.
Right.
And it's a lot harder to see what I'm experiencing. And, I can get away with that because very seldom am I in a crisis with people who don't know me and haven't worked with me in the past. And so I've already put money in the bank in terms of empathy and trust and so forth. And then what they want from me is just some really good, rational decision-making, and they want some direction, and they want to see confidence in my eyes. I do not believe in total transparency during a crisis, because there are times when the leader really has no answers, and it doesn't do anyone any good for that leader to inject more uncertainty or less confidence into the situation. And so, I've always tried to be a calming influence, even when inside I was full of butterflies. My job is to make people more effective in a crisis.
Right.
And you don't get that by spinning them up or by sharing your own fears and anxieties. That's almost selfish of a leader in a crisis.
I have a friend of mine who talks about effectively a similar thing, which is why being authentic is overrated. It's like, let me show you what authentic looks like. And it's this. And you don't want this as a presenter or a speaker or a teacher or a leader. You want somebody who's going, I know the role that's useful for me to play. How do I inhabit it in a way that is true to who I am, but is also appropriate to the moment?
Exactly. And especially when emotions are really high. When I've been around panicked people, the kind of leadership they wanted from me was 100% authoritative and directive. They wanted me to tell them what to do. And, I hope you haven't, but if you've ever had to talk to a physician about a devastating medical diagnosis, that is not a negotiation. You're looking that expert in the eye and you want them to tell you exactly what the proper course of action is. Right. That's how people get when they're really afraid. They really do want direction. They're already motivated. They don't need the motivating aspects of a leader. They need the directive aspects of a leader.
That's very interesting, Tom. How in those moments do you process or manage your own butterflies, as you said? You're like, I know what people need from me is direction. I know they need reassurance that I'm feeling competent and confident and I've got that light of certainty in my eye. But as you say, there's what you're portraying, but inside you might be going, oh no, I'm feeling a bit panicked about this as well. Is it just experience that's taught you how to separate the two, or do you have a way of managing and processing that kind of that internal feeling?
No, I have a way, and it's teachable. And there's no difference in gender with it, and it has to do with task focus.
Right.
So if you can intently focus on a task, it's very hard to feel your own emotions because you're in the prefrontal cortex of your brain.
Right.
That's where tasks are held and where task focus occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only after the task that you slip back into your amygdala and you start feeling fear and anger.
Right.
So I try to keep myself focused intently on, fixing the problem. And in a really dangerous place or set of conditions, the reason it's dangerous is because there's so much uncertainty, so many things that you can't know or you can't predict. And so having this outward focus where you're scanning the environment and trying to make sense of what's happening is a very calming thing to do. And if you're focused hard enough, you're not going to feel fear. You're not going to feel anger. And often, if you've ever been on an aircraft where people were getting ready to jump, for the 5 minutes before the jump, all they're doing is checking equipment.
Right. That's true. I've done that. And that's what you do. You check and you recheck and you recheck, because I'm like, I will stay busy.
Right. And it's not that you haven't checked before, but it's that everyone performing those tasks settles everyone down and they're ready to go. And so, I always used to tell cadets when we were trying to teach them how to be calm in dangerous places, I'd say, never tell someone to control their emotions, because then they'll turn inwards and that'll make them worse. Mm-hmm. You just tell them you are not focused. You need to focus on what you're doing, and then give them a task if they don't have one. And that generally calms down, even the most nervous person.
And I like how that brings us back to where we started the conversation, Tom, which is, evaluating risk and having a default response to, I need to focus. And actually, there are two things I need to figure out in this situation: what's most likely to happen and what's most dangerous to happen. So now I've got two specific things that I need to work on and be smart about and be focused about, for the sake of the people I'm leading, but also for the sake of me self-managing my emotions around what's happening right now.
Precisely. And it's okay to share that.
Yeah. Tom, this has been a great conversation. I knew it would be. I'm looking forward to seeing you again and hanging out with you again when all of this is over. For people who are curious about the work you do and want to look you up online, where can they find you?
Oh, gosh. Well, we are the John and Doerr Institute. So
yes.
Doerr, .institute. And that comes up everywhere, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. So we're fairly easy to find. Doerr.rice.edu is our university website. And I have a website called tomkolditz.com.
Tom, in a minute or two, can you just talk very briefly about the work you've been doing around coaching within the Institute? Because really you've been doing some such interesting and fascinating stuff about that.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And we feel that we are really disrupting the coaching industry in a good way.
Yeah.
So our basic approach in the Doerr Institute is to offer high quality, executive quality leader development to every single student at the university, graduate and undergraduate students. And at Rice, that's about 7,500 people. And so we started by offering every one of them who wanted one a professional business coach from the Houston business community, an ICF coach. And we get about 40% of students who want that. So we have a fairly large coaching pool. We do a lot of coaching. But, they have learned now what coaching means. And we now have undergraduates, class of 2020, graduating college seniors, who have become ACC certified in ICF coaching.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
They are credentialed coaches now. And so the switch has really started to flip in higher education, where coaching is, at least at Rice, it's much more important than mentoring, much more effective from our perspective. And, the business models allow us to do it without it being heinously expensive like it sometimes is in industry. So it's affordable. It costs about half as much as classroom instruction.
Right.
So that's us. We're just trying, we're happy about coaching because it works. We do a lot of outcome measurement on shifts in leader identity and changes in leader competencies and things like that. And nothing works better than coaching. Nothing that we've tried. And believe me, if we had something that was better, we'd use it. But
when have you written up kind of the story of this, the research of this? Because if you haven't, there's 1,000 people going, write the damn thing up, Tom.
Well, we have. In fact, we have a book that just went to the publisher.
Great.
It'll be out in January. We also have a deal that we've cut with the Carnegie Foundation. And Carnegie classifies universities in the US, Canada, and Australia. And we are creating an elective classification for leadership education and development for all 4,500 schools in the US, Canada, and Australia.
Amazing.
It's an optional thing. A university does not have to go for the credential, but it'll be there as a way for them to self-examine and to guide themselves so that we can increase the quality of leader development in universities across the globe.
And Tom, what's the working title of the new book?
I think that we've called it Disrupting University Leader Development.
Cool. I'll keep an eye out for that. I'm excited to see it. Tom, it's been a great conversation. You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Michael, you're a terrific moderator and interviewer. I've really enjoyed this time with you.
We hope you enjoyed this Best of MBS interview. Want more great content? Head to mbs.works. There you'll find MBS's new podcast, 2 Pages. You can learn about his best-selling books, and you can join the newsletter. That's mbs.works.